that song, and my office mate is apparently too young to know what I was talking about, which I found a great tragedy. The only thing you should know about what I'm about to read is that it is not in any way autobiographical. And if you encounter any of my colleagues, I'm a librarian here at the university, please don't mention that you heard any of this. So, okay. This is called The Librarians of the Midwest. The librarians of the Midwest had been threatening for some time to discipline me for my behavior. My behavior was making them anxious, they said. Mostly it was the womanizing. I had slept with or fingered too many of them. It was true, I spent much of my free time seducing the librarians. I've been known to become very sex-minded after my third beer. Apparently my urges and their success had engendered some friction in the library community. I had something coming, you might say. And so it was the librarians of the Midwest accosted me in the Learning Resource Laboratory of the Cochrane Academy for Librarians and announced they had decided to hang me. So before I'm hanged, I really think it's appropriate to offer some background. The librarians of the Midwest, except for me, were all women. They were enthusiastic knitters. They wore scarves in 85-degree weather. They drank craft organic beers, and they were deeply concerned about Republican advances against their reproductive systems. I found myself among the librarians of the Midwest when I was 27 and freshly divorced and deeply troubled about the issue of keeping books in a coherent order. I had been recommended to the Academy by my former boss, herself an Academy graduate, who apparently saw in me some potential that might be nurtured by the traditionally all-female Academy. It's worth mentioning that I was not, by ordinary standards, a handsome man. I was balding rapidly. I was at least 40 pounds overweight. Since I'd divorced, I'd grown a beard, and a lot of women, I had discovered, were opposed not only to beards, but also to my being bald and fat. Also, I possessed frightful mental health. I had spells, you might say. I experienced day-long intervals where I'd be convinced that I was about to die of a heart attack or aortic dissection or some random ischemic event. I was terrified that my circulatory system would suddenly betray me. This, in addition to the fact that sometimes I'd get so miserable about the ex-wife or the organizing books issue that I'd consider electrocuting myself with a hairdryer. I was unwell. But I was the first male student at the Academy in almost a decade. I would like to submit that humping a librarian is uniquely wonderful. Imagine boning in a library. That ought to be a goal of yours. Now imagine the aspects of such a library experience recursively. Consider the potential of boning a librarian in a library while consulting library materials to enhance said boning. I once had upright sex with red-haired Penelope Toomer against the book stacks while we independently consulted reference works on our respective anatomies and ancient Indian sexual illustrations. This is something I cannot recommend enough. The librarians of the Midwest instructed me in bizarre and subject-specific sexual maneuvers. The reverse antelope, the thrusting dewey, the Boolean operator. Kind, Jane Austen-obsessed Penelope Sack introduced me to the Otlay tickle. Before all this hanging business, a woman named Ginger Pancoast, a logician from Tennessee, promised that she would show me a maneuver known as the Ranganathan car wash. I was heartbroken that this would never occur. It's difficult for me to relate how suddenly and how completely I fell in love with the librarians of the Midwest. They'd interested me in ways women hadn't interested me before. They'd read complicated shit and wanted to fight about it. They'd read Michel Foucault and Jacques Lacan and proclaimed that Ernest Hemingway was a pussy. They'd read in foreign languages. They'd read Proust in French and Goethe in German and Catullus in fucking Latin. They lost their virginities long before the senior prom. They were beautiful. Even the ugly ones were hot. Several of them claimed to be bisexual, and I suspect all of them were willing to try it out. They wore modest, semi-professional clothing that made it challenging, but all the more rewarding, to imagine them naked. They liked farmers' markets and counter-protesting at the Planned Parenthood. They had fierce loyalties to their cats. They baked brownies for no reason at all. When they undressed, they'd keep surprising you. They had tattoos and exotic piercings and microdermal posts embedded under their clavicles. They did not shave their legs. When I asked the librarians of the Midwest if it was really necessary to hang me, the brilliant Annabelle Smee emerged as their leader. Yes, said Smee, they debated vigorously among themselves and decided a hanging was the only option. I told Annabelle I loved her. I might have been telling the truth. I'd once taken Annabelle out for Korean food, and we'd argued about Andrea Dworkin until 3 in the morning and fallen asleep leaning against each other on her love seat. Smee said, "You're in love with half the women here, you moron. That's precisely the problem. This cannot stand." "But what if it's true?" I asked. "What if we're really all in love?" "It isn't and we're not," countered Smee. "In any case, it's become obvious that you're all wrong for us. We're goal-oriented librarians. We've got administration on our minds. Presidencies of professional organizations. We're not here to sleep with or fall in love with you. We've got futures to think about. We're going to be deans." I asked Annabelle if she was in love with me. She said, "It's come about that several of us think we are in love with you. This is precisely why you must be hanged." "Whether I love you or not is immaterial. I'm certain that I love you all," I said, "for serious. If you don't hang me, I promise I'll marry just one of you. I'll be good. I'll quit it with the seducing." "This is inappropriate," Smee said. "It's gone too far. You're sleeping with over a dozen women. God knows how many you've fingered. Even with prophylactics, that's got to be unhygienic. And I have no idea how you've held up under the physical strain of all this lovemaking. You don't even appear to have lost weight." "I'm very economical with my movements," I said. "I found a book." Just shut up," she said. I'd never intended to sleep with so many of the librarians. I could not have anticipated my effect. All I'd hoped before all of this was that perhaps I could find one of them to love and then follow her around for the rest of my life. Being the extra librarian, the superfluous IT guy, the spousal hire at some medium-sized American university. I was not ambitious. But the librarians were right. I had gone too far. I had spoiled things. The librarians of the Midwest got down to the logistics. Librarians do this very well. The hanging would take place in 3 days at dusk. I would be hanged from the Academy's 35-foot stone gateway, right after the nightly lowering of the portcullis. Observers could watch the hanging from paddle boats in the moat. Ginger Pancoast said she'd be happy to knit me a noose. I requested that she consult a materials handbook from the engineering collection to be certain that her noose and rope and stitch pattern would have appropriate ductility and length to weight ratio to snap my neck. I didn't want to just hang there suffocating, and I'd rather not be decapitated. The librarians of the Midwest agreed that such an error would be unnecessarily gruesome and outside the spirit of things. Several of the librarians offered to bake cookies. Luella Sweeney said she'd play a song on her banjo. Whitney Opperman, who had a PhD in forensic anthropology from the University of Florida, would anonymize and dispose of my corpse. Everything was settled. The reality of it was apparent. I made a last appeal to the librarian's professional coda and asked if hanging me wouldn't represent a horrible infringement on my freedom to read. And once again, it was Annabelle Smee that answered, and she said, "Reading books never did anything good for boys like you."